going to talk about today are 4 writing strategies that I've sort of concluded are important to what I call business/professional writing. You know, the kind of writing that you will do on national security affairs on the job. Now, all that said, you know, almost all of these principles are also related to academic writing as well. But I'm going to start off, and then at the end of the presentation, after the 4 strategies, I'm going to talk about how to improve the clarity and precision of individual sentences. So I'm going to start off today by talking about strategy number 1. Key writing strategy is write to a target audience. Now, I'm not talking about writing an academic paper here. I'm talking about you're on the job and someone's asked you to write a report or a memo. What is your number 1 goal after you've written that memo? Anything?
To be understood.
To be understood. Before it's understood, something else has to occur.
That someone will actually read it.
That someone will actually read it. Guess what? There's no guarantee. These people that you will write for in the national security world, they are very busy people, and they're not brain dead, and they've been around a long time, and they have their own views, probably on the subject that you are writing about in that paper or memo. So to get them to read it, I think the paper has to be 3 things. 1, it's got to be readable. Goes without saying. It's got to be short, it's got to be concise, it's got to be precise. If they have to read it, a sentence over and over again, they're not going to waste their time. It also has to be relevant. If it's not relevant, you know, what's the point in them reading it? If the ideas and the information in that report aren't the kinds of things that help them do their job, and by that I mean improve their understanding of a situation or help them in their decision making, they're also going to stop reading. And then lastly, it has to be credible. And what do I mean by credible? By credible, I mean a couple things. 1, you have to be knowledgeable. I mean, you have to know, you have to look like you know your facts, and your facts are right. The other thing you have to do is you have to be objective and fair-minded. If you look like you have an axe to grind or an agenda, and that axe to grind or agenda is different from the policymaker's agenda, they're also going to stop reading and just conclude that this is just an unbiased view. And then lastly, you have to be thorough. And by thorough, I mean your judgments have to be balanced. And they have to be balanced in accordance with the evidence you present. And if there's opportunity with the data to where other explanations are possible, then those other explanations, alternative views, need to be presented in your paper or report. The key here is they have to be all 3. 2 out of 3 is not going to cover it. So that's key strategy number 1 to getting your paper read. You know, make it readable, make it relevant, and make it credible. Okay, second key writing strategy. You know, evaluate your draft from a reader's perspective. I mean, put yourself in the reader's shoes, not your shoes as the author, because that's easy to do, and I think that's what most people do. Put yourself in the reader's shoes. Now, I can't understate the importance of this strategy enough, because in my mind, almost all good writing habits are driven by this one perspective. Okay. I'm going to show you various writing examples to demonstrate various teaching points. And what I just want to say is none of those are concocted. I mean, they're all real writing examples. So there are real problems out there. Which of these two versions of the same idea that you like the best. Anybody? Sir?
The second one
The second one. Why is that?
gives me the conclusion in the first line.
Exactly. You know, this is an example of where someone, and this was written by an attorney, and I'm sure the attorney reviewed that particular sentence before he let it go. But the attorney knew where he was going. So when he read all that introductory material that the mind has to sort of, you know, understand and process and sort out, that didn't pose any problem to him because he knew what it all meant. But when the reader hits this cold, it poses a little bit of a problem. Now, when you put yourself in the reader's shoes, look not just at the sentences, but look at organization as well. I mean, is there information that's coming a little too late or a little too early for the reader? Along that line, if you could turn to example number 1. So the message here is just don't focus on the sentences, focus on the organization. What is it about example 1 that poses a problem to you as a reader? Anybody? Sir?
He's kind of trying to include two ideas or two concepts in the same group of clauses. So he's giving some biographical information about Louis Beam, but then also talking about the leaderless strategy and counterterrorism efforts, and it's all mixed together. And there's no like logical lead from one to the other. They could be separate.
You know, I think that's a very interesting perspective, and I think you're right. And I think that was not his intent. But I think it came out that way because how the information is shuffled. Not shuffled in the best way. But the problem related to what you just said for me as a reader is, when I first read that sentence, I didn't know what the leaderless resistance strategy was. And I didn't find out until the end of the paragraph. And that may have been what created this impression in your mind that this thing is jumping all over the place. In this particular case, I mean, I'm trying to understand this thought. Complicates efforts by law enforcement to disrupt these groups. I can't comprehend that thought unless I know what the leaderless resistance strategy is. So I think putting yourself in the reader's shoes, it's hard to underestimate how much good that can do for you. At a class at George Washington this summer, I had a student tell me that this is really hard to do, and you know, you can't turn your brain off and forget everything you know. And to get around that problem, he had someone else review his paper. And I think that's a good alternative, but I don't think it's the optimum alternative for a number of reasons. One is someone else is not always going to be available. And two is that, you know, that other person is going to have other priorities besides your paper. And the amount of focus and attention they put into it, it's a good chance it's not going to be as much as the focus at the same level that you would put into it. So how are you going to do this? I think we just kind of experimented with it a little bit right here. So when you read something, and I'm saying begin to read everything, not just from a content point of view, although it's sometimes hard to separate the content and the writing, but read it critically from a writing perspective. Anything. Newspaper articles, internet stories, your roommate's papers, of course your own papers. And as you're reading your paper, ask yourself questions like, you know, what was confusing? what needed clarification, what needed to have its relevance explained, what struck you as wordy, what struck you as information that as a reader you just didn't need and it could have been deleted and you could have saved time and gone on to reading something else. If you do that, and you do that enough, and I don't think it really takes too long, you can get quite good at that. Now, that kind of writing analysis, this is where it gets into, what's in it for you. That kind of writing analysis, and especially the questions that you ask as you're reading text that's confusing, and believe me, there's plenty of confusing text out there to read. You will find no shortage of material, written material that needs improvement. That writing analysis and the questions, and particularly your solutions to fixing those problems, okay, those become self-teaching writing points that you then apply to your own writing. They're part of your writing consciousness and your writing repertoire. And if you see someone make a mistake, it's human nature. The chances of you making that same mistake, go down radically. Now I want to say something about confused writing because confusion in writing occurs in two forms. One is what I call confusion in the words. The words as they're assembled just don't make sense. Bad writing. And then there's what I call confusion in the information. The information doesn't add up, it's not consistent, or key information is missing. And in my view, confusion in the information is at least as bad and sometimes worse than confusion in the writing. And here's why I think that. If you write me a garbled sentence, I can read it enough times and maybe figure it out. But if you write me something and the information is not in that sentence that I need to understand that idea, I am lost at sea. So to give you a couple examples of this, look at example 2. If I'm in the way of the screen, let me know, because I'm bouncing around up here. Would anybody want to offer some suggestion as to what the major problem is with that particular paragraph as it relates to information and you understanding what's trying to be said? Okay, sir? Don't be, I got to say this, don't feel bad about answering a question and it doesn't agree with me.
There's a lot of numbers and percentages.
Yeah.
It varies between 50%, 2/3.
Yeah.
So it's hard to grasp for some people. It would be what I argue.
I think you're close, but not quite. Sir?
Well, what's the relationship between charcoal?
You got it. You got it. I had no idea. I read that paper and I went, okay, we're talking about charcoal and now we're talking about logging and timber. Do you know how I had to get the answer to that question?
Wikipedia.
Exactly. You know what? And anytime, I know I did. I typed in charcoal and there it came, I didn't know that. Charcoal apparently is a wood product that's created by some process. Anytime your reader has to go to Wikipedia to understand your point, that is a bad idea. Not a good situation. So, this information in the confusion occurs primarily in two forms. One is there'll be information A, and then there'll be sort of conclusion C, which is intended to support the broader judgment, and B is missing. Okay? That's a pretty catastrophic problem because you can't get from A to C without B. The other way it occurs, and if you could look at the next example in the handout, I think it's about, it's the example on the American Red Cross. Now, in this particular case, A and B are present in that paragraph, but how A and B adds up to equal C is not clear. And the reader, because A and B are both there, can kind of figure it out. Well, you know, you don't want the reader to kind of figure it out for themselves, okay? Write it as you intended it to be conveyed, and save the reader a lot of grief. Oh, I went the wrong way, sorry. Oh, by the way, I didn't bring this one up. So you could have fixed this problem with, I think, something like 5 words. Problem solved. I took the 2 ideas and I drew out the conclusion, or I wrote it so that the conclusion was clear. Okay. You know, what you're trying to determine when you're reading your paper from the reader's perspective is how readable is your paper. And there's a spectrum here. You know, at one end of the spectrum, we'll call it the bottom end. The reader has to read every sentence or many sentences over and over again. Has to kind of think about it. And then maybe he or she gets it, maybe they don't. And believe me, there is a lot of writing out there like that, unfortunately. And then at the top end of the spectrum is the reader gets it all very quickly, almost immediately, and can move on to another task, okay? In the latter case, the reason the reader is able to get it is that everything in the paper appears related and is in the right place for the reader. Okay. Now, that is a pretty high standard, but you know, that's the standard that you have to be shooting for. Every sentence and every paragraph in the paper should have, in every word in every sentence, should have a purpose and an objective for being in there. I like to think of the overall message of the paper as the strategic goal. You know, what is my bottom line that I'm trying to get across? And then as a subset of that, I have lots of tactical goals. Every paragraph and every sentence has a tactical goal of advancing and leading the reader to the message in step-by-step fashion. So everything in your paper is important. And that brings us, I think, to writing strategy 3. And writing strategy 3 is let the message drive the writing, okay? And sometimes, unfortunately, when the writing's driving the message, guess what gets lost? The message, okay? You know, where does this strategy come into play? How much additional context to include? It's very easy for a paper to go off on a tangent. I mean, you can stray into other topics and other details almost unconsciously. And how that happens is that you'll have an idea that you want to support, and you'll provide supporting information, and then you'll provide some background contextual information for the supporting information, and then you'll provide additional contextual background information for the contextual background information that's supporting. You know where I'm going here. At some point, the main message of that paragraph has been diluted and confused by all that contextual information. So the thing here is to remember how much detail does your reader need to know. And sometimes this detail can occur as a whole sentence, and the whole sentence has to go. But you want to be hard-nosed about this, okay? And when you get really good at it, you start attacking not just whole sentences, but parts of sentences, okay? Because you got a message, and you're trying to get this message across. And you've got a sentence, and the sentence has got detail in it. Does the reader need that detail to get the message? And if the answer is no, you got to be hard-nosed, it's got to go. So if you look at the next example, think it's example 4 about the Eastern Star. The Eastern Star was a Chinese ship, I think probably last year, I don't remember, that capsized or something, and a lot of people drowned, and Chinese people were getting pretty upset about it. And so, a lot of people started digging around the safety record on this particular vessel. In that particular sentence that begins, the second sentence, the Eastern Star was one of. Is there information in there that I need to know? That's meaningful to me? And the key word here is meaningful from the perspective of the overall message. What is it? What would you delete here? Sir?
I would probably delete the according to a document by the Jiangsu Maritime Safety Administration. You can just cite that. You don't need to put that in there. It's just extra stuff.
Well, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but I think most of the time, if you're writing a 2 or 3 page report for a policymaker, you're not going to have footnotes because they're not going to want to be going to the footnotes. You're going to want that source reference embedded into the document. Ma'am?
Does it matter that it's one of 6?
Absolutely, doesn't matter at all. What if it's one of 60? Tell me what difference it makes, okay? It doesn't make any at all. So the point here is that, just don't look for big stuff, look for little stuff as well, What the sentence emphasizes, and I see this all the time, okay? The main clause in the sentence should emphasize the main point. If it does not, it appears as a disconnect to the reader, and the reader's confused as to what the main point is. Most of the time, I think we need to take background or context material and use it as a dependent clause in the sentence, or put it after the sentence that's emphasizing the main point. That way it'll sort of be clear as to what you're emphasizing and how the pieces of the puzzle are fitting together regarding the message you're trying to get across. So if you could look at example 5, and look at the sentence, pay particular attention to the sentence I have underlined. I see this all the time. Now I'm reading this paragraph, okay, I'm the reader, I'm in the frame of mind, it's going to hell in a handbasket in Ukraine. And then I get a sentence that tells me, I don't have my glasses. It totally confuses me. The Ukrainian currency has maintained a fairly stable 8-to-1 exchange rate to the dollar since December 2008. And my reaction is, you say, what? Where are we going with this? I thought things were going to pot. Well, if it's, maybe they're not all going to pot. What are we trying to say here? Well, then I have to read the next sentence to figure out that's contextual information. You don't have to do that to the reader if you put that information in a dependent clause, and you use the main clause in the sentence to emphasize the main point in that particular sentence. And this is how I suggested to the student to react to, what's going on? To rewrite that sentence. So when I get to this sentence right here, I got a basis for saying, okay, now I know the currency's going to, not doing well. So I could just as easily, sometimes you have a problem with length when you try to work some of this contextual material into a sentence. You don't want to create a sentence that goes on forever. I don't think this sentence does it, but it's certainly possible. In that situation, you might want to take this information and put it down here. It's contextual information to understand a little bit better what's going on right there. Let me go back. And then how the sentence is constructed, okay? Go ahead and which of those two sentences do you think are more effective? Two paragraphs. And the two sentences in red. Anyone? Ma'am?
The second one.
The second one. Yeah, right. You know why? Because this is allowing the message to drive the writing, and I'm constructing this sentence in a way that I'm focused on supporting this topic sentence. When I read that sentence the first time, I read the topic sentence, okay, in this paragraph. Under severe pressure from expanding enrollment. Okay, I got that idea. Let's move on. Then I read the enrollment capacity of universities in Kenya, that's a typo, sorry, has more than doubled. Meaning that, they've doubled some of what, the number of students they could teach, and at that point I'm going, what's the problem again? Okay. Then I have to read another sentence, okay? It's not flowing well for the reader. So, just to reiterate, let the message drive the writing. Are there details in there you don't need? Is your sentence, each and every sentence, emphasizing what you think needs to be emphasizing? And then lastly, is the sentence constructed in a way that it's supporting or reinforcing the idea that you're intending it to support? The biggest problem that I see in most papers is a lack of focus. It's just stuff, because of some of these problems, just is all over the place, and the reader is really having a hard time putting the pieces together. I think that the key to writing focused papers, and I would bet my life on this probably, is to write focused topic sentences that emphasize or are trying to convey, a single main message at that point in the paper. If you're not writing focused topic sentences, you've kind of opened it up to a free-for-all, so to speak, regarding that paragraph, because anything and everything is fair game for inclusion in that paragraph. And the other problem you encounter is that if you don't have a good idea at point A in the paper, and it's muddled and confused at point A, I have no idea how you're going to get to point B, okay? It seems to me like you can do it, but it's risky and hard. So have a good topic sentence, and it will help you and the reader. Right now, go ahead and look at example 6. I'm not talking too fast, am I? So, paragraph doesn't have a topic sentence. It just kind of jumps into the data. And this is a paragraph where the idea is not overly complicated. I can kind of get it. It's not an optimal solution, but I think that paragraph would benefit. The reader would benefit from a topic sentence. And what do you think is the main point in that paragraph? It's a fairly straightforward, simple point, right? That foreign students in the U.S. provide, financial benefit to U.S. businesses. That's true, but you can help the reader better capture the idea. And by better capturing, I mean you can help them sort of scale the problem, and you tell the reader you're getting your information from. Okay. And then when I read that and I read the other sentences, it all kind of fits together. You know, and I'm taking away more than just foreign students help the U.S. I'm taking away, at the minimum, billions of dollars, and probably I'm taking $10 billion away. So I have an order of magnitude that I may not necessarily get unless I'm reading very, very closely, and I'm processing those details for myself. Now this is an example of where the reader can sort of get it, but believe me, there are examples where it gets pretty difficult. Go ahead and look at, we'll take example 7. This one's a little harder. Readers got to process it, think about it a little longer. When you change when you provide that topic sentence, and I know that sounds like grade school stuff, but it's really important. Think of it as the main purpose for this paragraph. And it's captured in a topic sentence or whatever you want to call it. Then I can read all this information and I can process it, I can sort it, I can put it in different mental baskets, and it all makes sense to me. And that, I'm guessing here that's what the writer intended to convey. And I think I did a pretty good job of getting at what he or she was trying to convey, but I had to work at it, and I'm the reviewer of a student paper. Your boss is not going to appreciate you unloading all that work on them, and he or she will want better. Now, example 7A is where it gets incredibly tough. And you'll notice that this is a very well-written paragraph. Now, it was actually written by Henry Kissinger. And Henry Kissinger provided the topic sentence. And I deliberately took the topic sentence away to show you or try to demonstrate how hard it is to get the main message when you, the writer, aren't providing the main message. So based on those sentences, does anybody want to have an idea as to what Kissinger was trying to convey? It's really pretty interesting. I mean, that probably goes without saying, but the ambivalence of U.S. behavior in the international arena is what he was trying to get at. Okay. You provide a topic sentence like that, and then you provide all that other supporting information. It just works well. This main point in the paragraph, most of the time, has to be some kind of judgment, like this is right here, or it has to be some sort of synthesis of several facts. Okay. Over the past 6 months, China has taken, several steps to protect the value of its stocks market. And then you would sort of almost itemize what those several steps were. And that would just be the focus of one message. You would have more to your paper than that, but it's possible to have a topic sentence that is based on a synthesis or summary of a series of related facts. I think it's very hard to have a topic sentence or a main point or a judgment. I don't know how you can have a judgment with one fact, because it's a fact. Now, you can have a topic sentence built around one fact when it incorporates a judgment. That's the only way I know. The two most important characteristics for a topic sentence are precision and completeness. And by precision, I mean the idea is unique and specific. Okay? There's no ambiguity about what the paragraph's main message is. And completeness, by completeness, what I mean is that if there's a main idea in the body of the paragraph, and I'm not talking about extraneous material here, but a main idea, you know, you want to get that worked into the topic sentence in some form. Now, how do I know a sentence is, a topic sentence is precise enough? Well, if I have a topic sentence, and I could take that topic sentence and tack it on to other paragraphs I've written, chances are it's not going to be appropriate for that particular paragraph. So go ahead and take a look at example 9. What are the... In that topic sentence, what idea strikes you as sort of being vague? Not really well defined. I see this all the time too, by the way. Ma'am?
Perceived national security issue.
Possibly. In what way?
Not defining what issue it is that they're worried about.
That's a valid point. Sir?
How does 9/11 threat to international students, did make it more clear the connection?
I think so. I think that's sort of related to that other point. And I think those are all valid points. Sir?
Just reading it, when they say swiftly and then they talk about perceived, I'm wondering if they're going to go in one direction about how they reacted swiftly, or if they're going to go in another direction.
Yeah.
How it's just.
That's a good point. I actually hadn't thought of that, but that is a problem with that topic sentence in addition. In my view, the biggest problem with that topic sentence is reacted slowly. Okay. Reacted quickly. Because I had no idea what reacted quickly means. And when I was thinking about it, I could have taken that topic sentence and I could have used it to the U.S. government reaction after the bombing at Pearl Harbor. The U.S. government reacted swiftly, and they put a lot of Japanese Americans in internment camps, and they kept them there for 4 years. Well, that's a whole lot different than setting up some databases to help track foreign students. So that's what I mean as when I say, the topic sentence really needs to be unique. And I do agree that that this perceived national security problem, that could also use a little bit more expansion. And I doubt if it would have taken very many additional words. So, if you haven't got, you know where I'm coming from by now for sure. You've got to have a strong topic sentence in your paragraph. And if you don't, the likelihood of you writing something that's not very focused is going to be pretty high. If you look at example 8, like as I said earlier, the topic sentence allows you to keep the writing focused on the message. And in the middle of that paragraph, well, the topic sentence is not bad. The topic sentence starts out as there's some tension in the relationship, but they're working together. And then it goes to this idea, but You know, if the tension got really bad, Al-Shabaab might tell them to take a hike and they'll do their own piracy thing. And then it goes back to working together under tension again. And this idea that it might all fall apart doesn't belong in that paragraph. It doesn't belong certainly in the middle of that paragraph. Arguably, you could put that at the end of the paragraph. I would argue that that's a different analytic point than they're just don't really like each other, but they manage to work it out because there's some mutual interest. That's much different than one party telling the other party to take a hike. And if Al-Shabaab got into piracy, there could be some tangential benefits to how it conducts terrorist operations. I would argue that's a different thought and belongs in a different paragraph. Okay, example 10 is my favorite paragraph. And I'm going to conclude my discussion of topic sentences with this paragraph. It may be the worst paragraph I ever encountered. And I have to tell you, that paper was filled with paragraphs like that. It would have taken me, I'm not going to live long enough to process that paper in its entirety, because it's real time consuming when the writing's not done well. There's no need to answer any questions regarding that paragraph. The paragraph really kind of speaks for itself. Okay, that brings us to writing strategy 3. You know, conduct a comprehensive review of your paper. So my first recommendation is to have an attitude. And I put attitude in quotes for a reason. What do you think I mean by attitude right here? Sir?
Be critical.
Ah, yes, be critical. Exactly. You couldn't have said it better. Attitude is not, my paper is great, I love this paper, I'm going to go out and have a beer. Okay, that's not attitude. Attitude is, I'm going to step back and I'm going to challenge this paper. I'm going to challenge every word. I know you guys must think that's crazy, but I think you need to do it. Every sentence in every paragraph. And I'm not going to assume that the paper is okay except for some minor problems. I'm going to take the opposite approach. I'm going to assume that the paper probably has big flaws. I need to find them and I need to fix them. And the reality is, for most first drafts, mine included, and I think I'm a pretty good writer, I'm always going back and making major revisions. So, review your paper critically. Most of the time, I think when graduate students, and I could be wrong, but review their paper, they're what I call passive reviewers. They're kind of skimming it, and they're really not systematically and rigorously, for lack of a better word, and I think it's a good word, attacking their paper critically. Okay. Second strategy in how to conduct an extensive review is, talk to yourself. Rather than just skimming your paper, I think it's a good idea to have a systematic approach. And I would suggest that there are 5 questions you should ask yourself regarding your paper. Okay, the first question is, what is the paper's main message? What is the paper's bottom line? And I really think this is the most important step in reviewing your paper. Because if you don't have a very well-defined main message, it's going to be almost impossible to bind that paper together because there's nothing to bind. Okay? It's by definition almost going to look unfocused. And by talk to yourself, what I mean is you have to articulate this out loud. Because I had this theory that sometimes people hide behind words on paper. You know, it's like they think if I wrote it on paper and I just read it back to you, that somehow that gives those words legitimacy and clarity. And I've seen this play out when I've encountered a paper that seemed to go everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. And my approach to those papers is sort of an on-the-job kind of thing, not reviewing student papers. And it would be to ask the analyst, you know, what is the main message that you're trying to get across? And almost invariably what I would get is silence. Okay, I would get silence, and that's a bad sign. And then what I would get is, they would either start to read to me, which didn't help me very much, or they would begin to get into a rambling discussion that went on forever until I said, well, that's enough. You know, we need to talk about this. So ask yourself out loud, you know, what is it that you're trying to get across? You know, if you can't articulate it in plain and clear English, the odds are that you haven't thought through this problem well enough. Okay, second question for yourself has two parts. You know, what is the main idea in the next paragraph, and does it relate to the main message of the paper? And you also want to articulate this out loud. I know this may be time consuming, but it's helpful. And you want to do that for every paragraph in the paper. Third question for yourself. Is the main idea you just articulated for that paragraph flow logically from the main idea you articulated for the previous paragraph? In other words, you know, is this paragraph in the right place? And then sort of a related subset question of that is there any way that you could strengthen the linkage between the two paragraphs? And I want to pause here and introduce a caveat. One of the things not to do is to summarize the previous paragraph as a lead into the second paragraph. And I see this frequently as well. It'll go something like, I have to make up this example for demonstration purposes because I just don't have a ready example, but let's say you've written this paper and your bottom line is that Putin is an egomaniac. And then in your second paragraph, somehow or another, you found out that he's seeing a therapist to deal with this problem. What a lot of times people will write as a lead into that second paragraph will be, although Putin is an egomaniac, he is seeking a therapist to deal with this problem. Now, the reader is not brain dead most of the time. He's just read a paragraph where you've told him or her that he's an egomaniac. That language is just taking up space. There are much shorter and better alternatives to handling that particular problem. You know, words like however or in contrast, and there may be a few others. But, and people can get creative with some of these lead-ins to try to tie things in together. It's just not necessary. Also, if Putin is an egomaniac, and let's say in your next paragraph, I hope I don't cross the line here. I'm making this up on the fly. Your bottom line is he's an a-hole. Okay. You don't want to say, in addition to being an egomaniac, he's an a-hole. You can just say he's also an a-hole. You can do that. Okay. Don't waste the reader's time telling him or her things that they already know. Okay. Third question for yourself. Does the main idea you articulate, oh, we did that one, sorry. Fourth question. Does everything in the paragraph, this is what I mean by a rigorous and systematic review. This isn't easy, but it's what you have to do. It's what I do. Okay, I don't take anything for granted. Does everything in the paragraph relate to the main idea you're trying to convey? And is it in the optimal order? So that question also has two parts. Question 4. Then lastly, is anything missing? Now, what I see often, I see two problems sometimes. If we go back to the Al-Shabaab piracy paper, I'll be reading a sentence A, and then there'll be a period, and I'll start to read sentence B, and they'll have no connection. And I go, and it just makes me mad. And I usually go, what is going on here? Sometimes B is a relevant idea, but it's just misplaced. It doesn't belong there, like the example on Al-Shabaab and piracy. But just as often, B is relevant to A, but it's not apparent in the sentence. And the reader just needs a few words to connect B to A. And if those words aren't there, again, you know what the reader's got to do? He's got to pause and sort of figure this out on his own. And most of the time, that involves guesswork. Okay, getting back to this idea of conducting an extensive review. So one way is really to go through it word by word, and beginning at high order. High order meaning, what is the bottom line? What is this main idea that I'm trying to tell someone? There are a couple other ways of doing it. Way number 2 is to think of each paragraph as a standalone story. Okay. So you read your topic sentence, you read that paragraph. Does that all kind of fit together? That's a good technique for trying to determine whether or not there's stuff in the paragraph that either needs to be better explained or connected or needs to be moved to another location. The other way is just starting at page 1 of the paper, read each and every topic sentence. And are you seeing a clear and logical line of progression in the thinking from those topic sentences? And this is the most important component of how to review your paper. Give up your spring break. This is obviously a joke, but it sort of is and it isn't. It takes a lot of time to review your paper. It probably takes as much time reviewing it and fixing it as it does writing. Now, I don't have the data to support that, so that's sort of my, anecdotal experience, if you will. But, the bottom line is the same nonetheless. You really want to spend a lot of time on your reviewing your paper. So I want to end my presentation today talking about sentences and how to improve clarity and precision in sentences. What I'm going to do is sort of offer you a conceptual framework for thinking about words and how they relate, and then I'm going to offer some specific guidance. Regarding the conceptual framework, every word and every sentence has a relationship just by the fact that it's located in the same sentence with every other word in that sentence. And together and as a group, those words make up individual ideas. And the question is, are those words, or the ideas as they're represented by the words, as clear as possible? Are they the optimal words for what you're trying to convey? I mean, do they pass that relationship test? Now, the impact on the reader can vary, and it varies depending on how important those words are. In some cases, they're not necessarily important, but they give the writing kind of a clumsy feel. And in other cases, those words are really important and the reader is lost. In this particular sentence, what word strikes you as failing the relationship test? Pardon me?
Sensationalized?
I'm sorry, I don't hear very well.
Sensationalized?
Sensationalized? What would you change it to? I'm interested.
Reported, colored, yeah.
Okay. There may be better words for sensationalized, but I think I sort of understand what they're going there. You know, when all that stuff occurred in Ferguson, I don't know, anytime anything happens bad, the media shows up in droves. So I think they do have a tendency to sensationalize. Ma'am?
I would cut out the word every.
Every?
Change it to by major news outlets because it seems unlikely that every.
Okay. Perhaps. This is a limiting factor here and often also limits it. So I'm not sure. Ma'am?
I would change fired.
Fired.
Racially charged.
Fired didn't work for me. And this is not like, this is an example of something that's not critical to the meaning of the sentence. But I thought racially fired was pretty clumsy. And what I thought they meant was, I think we all know what they meant. There was a better word available. And along that line, I think you guys are sort of picking up, I think, on what I'm interested in you picking up is that when you're reading and reviewing your draft, if something strikes you as funny or not quite right, there's a good chance it needs work. Here's another example of where the words don't pass a relationship test. And the result is much more serious. This sentence really has a problem. And you know, once again, you know, if you have all the time in the world and you're going to live to your 200, you have time to set aside to figure this out. Okay, I got a little confused there, I'm sorry. What I wanted you to do was look at example. No, I'm okay, I'm sorry. This is my mistake. This is the part that the sentence is originally written that I thought was problematic. And this is where I think it needed to be expanded so that the ideas that were being compared were more legitimate. Okay, now I'm going to talk about some specific guidance. And I don't have time to talk about everything, but I kind of want to talk about what I think are the most important. You know, building sentences around the best subject and the best verb. Now, most of the time, when I encounter a sentence that meanders in a roundabout way, there's almost always a better subject available in that sentence. And it's in the sentence. The sentence is just not built around that particular subject. It's usually built around an auxiliary idea, and because of that, the sentence is almost forced to take a meandering approach. So the subject and the verb are very important. In my case, that if I can identify the main subject for a sentence, the verb almost always falls into place. And after the verb falls into place, the rest of the sentence falls into place. If the subject and the verb are not optimal, you're really risking what I call catastrophic failure again, where the reader doesn't get it at all. Now, racially fired wasn't catastrophic, but I'll show you some examples later where it can become catastrophic. The other thing is being explicit. Now, you know, being explicit and being exact takes time. But if you're not going to take the time to write it so that it's clear and precise, the reader's going to have to take their time to try to decode what you wrote. Now, most of the time, I think this problem is created because writers get a little lazy and they don't really take the time, or they're pressed for time and they take a shortcut. You know, they wrote something, it kind of hints at what they're getting at, but this thing is due tomorrow and I don't really have time to work on it anymore. Sometimes, though, the problem is not a writing problem, but a thinking problem. You know, the person writing it really hasn't thought it through enough and is just kind of using vague words and vague relationships to convey vague ideas. Eliminate verbiage. One of the things, I really believe this to be true, there is a huge connection between verbiage, unneeded words, and clarity. That, you know, and I like to say that, you know, excess verbiage, it's not free. You know, you just can't tack it on to a sentence and think that, well, the main idea still comes through clearly, these are just some extra words, you know, no harm done. The reality most of the time is that if you have a sentence that has too many words in it, it's probably got too many ideas in it, the pieces aren't fitting together very well, and clarity has taken a big hit, and some major trimming is necessary. I see this a lot, I think, with foreign students. They tend to want to throw everything in the kitchen sink in the sentence. And by the end of the sentence, you're just, you know, your eyes are glazed over because there's so many different parts to this puzzle and the relationships are not all clearly defined. Okay, let's talk about the subject and verb. Okay. This sentence is, it's not really accurate. It doesn't really, you know, the subject is a poor subject for what's trying to be conveyed. I ask myself, I tend to read things literally because that's the only way a reader can read them. You know, and I'm not there, you're not there telling me how I should read them. You know, how the paying of salaries threaten the joint venture is kind of open to interpretation. I don't really know. And what's really at issue here is disagreement. Now that's an idea that I can understand. This is a good example of a case where, you know, the sentence completely fails because of a bad verb choice. Anybody want to tell me what the main point in this sentence is? If you got one, you're good, because I have no idea. Go ahead.
I was going to say that I think the most important point is that India and Singapore are rivals for Japan. That's
Right.
what you're trying to communicate.
That's one possible explanation. And that's what happens when you put the reader in this situation, is that there are multiple interpretations here. And that is certainly one. Now, you don't want to write it so that the reader's got to pick and choose. I mean, one idea here, and I think this is where you were going, right? They're developing, producing technology and stuff that is, you know, competitive with Japan. The problem with providing is, you know, providing implies that something is being given to someone and that someone's not there. You know, are they talking about exports here? India and Singapore are exporting technology and manufacturing capabilities that are, you know, of the same quality of Japanese exports or something like that. Manufacturing, production manufacturing exports. Now, this idea of picking the best verb and the best subject, that doesn't just relate to the sentence, but sometimes you can have, a major clause where the subject or verb is not the best, and you really help the sentence or clause out a lot by finding the best subject or verb. What do you think should have been the subject in this clause because of the lack of affordability of college education amongst the poor? What is the better subject? Ma'am?
How would you phrase it to say, the poor?
Yeah. It's the poor. I mean, why make it difficult? The poor cannot afford higher education. Bingo, I got it. Okay, you have to be explicit. When you're not explicit, the reader's really lost. What is being conveyed in this sentence? And I'll show you in a second, as I've done, what I thought the main idea was. But again, it took me a lot of time. Ma'am?
The ability of Hezbollah to provide protection.
Yes. That's what, to the Shia, becomes uncertain. That didn't come to me in a split second. It certainly didn't come to me when I got to the period. From a paper this summer. Anybody? Ma'am?
First thing I thought was the doctor's ability to prescribe medicine actually has nothing to do with if the population is educated.
Yeah, right. This is a very simple idea that we got overcomplicated. Oh. Well, I'm running out of time. I kind of want to go to this example right here, because this gets back to my point earlier about if something strikes you as funny in your paper, it probably needs fixing. And I think, don't use, a $5 word when, a 10-cent word will work. Sometimes a $5 word actually can cause problems. Because, a reader doesn't, if it's not a word they encounter a lot, they don't know immediately, and immediately it's clear here what that word means. And taking a few extra words to spell that out is helpful to the reader. This is, supporting my idea that verbiage, eliminate verbiage because, it's not free. It complicates the sentence. It makes it harder for the reader to process. When I ran across self-sponsored, I went, well, what the hell is that? And I think that just means they're paying for their own education. But, I don't know what else it could possibly mean in that context. So I just think that's a wonderful example of throwing an idea in there that is sort of, is totally unnecessary. In this particular case here, what do you think would have made the optimum subject? I would argue that whatever this thing is here. Evidence of the presence of is just totally verbiage. This is an example of, a sentence that's written with a clause and a clause isn't needed. Most of the time when you start adding clauses to sentences that aren't needed, you're really complicating the sentence. In this particular sentence, if you make Bismarck the subject, and you think of the idea that you're trying to convey, you'll come up with a pretty good verb, and you won't have a clause in the sentence. If you see sentence constructions that are built around terms like "it is evident," that's a pretty good red flag that sentence could be better written. You're kind of taking a roundabout way and adding words that just aren't necessary. This is my favorite slide. It's a bicycle. And it kind of concludes my talk, but I have a couple small points to make. The point here is that learning how to write well is a lot like learning how to ride a bike. And I think it's not a perfect analogy, but I think it's true in two major ways. First way is that you didn't learn how to ride a bike until you got on that bike and you practiced over and over again. And as you practiced over and over again, what you could do on that bike got better and better. Okay. So if you want to learn how to write well, you're going to have to work at it. Now the other thing is, that's sort of a segue into my the second aspect in which writing is like riding a bike. How many people in here know how to ride a bike? Okay. How many people in here have at one time known how to ride a bike and forgot? Okay. Did you? It's occasionally. But I bet you if you got back on a bike, you'd learn quickly.
Oh, I did.
Okay. My point here is that once you learn how to write well, it's something that's not going to go away. It's going to be an asset to you for a long time, both in your classes and in the office. So the conclusion there is that whatever time and energy you spend now learning how to improve your writing, it'll pay dividends over the long term. And that concludes my talk. I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. I'll try my best to give you a good answer.
Sir, I'd like to know your thoughts on the idea of revising intermittently while you write, as opposed to revising after you write.
I think it can go both ways. I absolutely think that if you recognize a problem when you're writing, fix it. Okay? I'll tell you what you may have, what I discovered sometimes, though, is that I was right the first time. So you do have to do the review. But if I think I have a problem, I don't try to make a mental note of it or jot it down. I fix it. Any other questions? Okay. Well, it's a pleasure again. I'll be out here in, I don't know when.
Next semester.
Next month? Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Let me present you the challenge coin, which has the SSP symbol of the skull.
Thank you very much.